Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. New customer offer for first 3 months only. Speed slow after 35 gigabytes if network's busy. Taxes and fees extra. See mintmobile.com.
Crazy is the new normal. For instance, Trump spent the last few days over in Scotland. The stated purpose was to negotiate trade golf over his golf tariffs with European golf, because he went there to play golf. He spent your tax dollars to open his new course in Aberdeen. And it was a grift for the whole family because the course was designed by Eric Trump, who was allowed out of his crate to say a few words.
This course is remarkable. Nothing was left out. We had an unlimited budget, and we exceeded it.
What? That's not easy.
Welcome to Quiet Riot, the politics podcast that tries to keep things calm, even when everything else is falling into a steaming pile of headlines. I'm Andreou.
And I'm Naomi Smith. This week's news has served as outrage, accusation, and actual international diplomacy. So whether you're grinding your teeth or just quietly screaming into a cushion,
take a beat, get comfy, and help us begin another Quiet Riot.
Quiet Riot. Hello, and welcome to Quiet Riot. I'm Naomi.
And I'm Alex.
And I'm Kenny, here to keep time, keep calm, and fill the role of performing monkey between these two organ grinders.
This week, guest-free, we are diving into the very murky waters of online safety. The government's long-trailed Online Safety Act is finally beginning to bite. I say the government's. It was the Conservative government's act, which is now being rolled out by the Labour government. And as I say, it's beginning to bite, or at least nibble, as Ofcom prepares to enforce age verification requirements. But what should be a grown-up conversation about protecting children online has descended, predictably, into a shouting match.
Meanwhile, in the physical world, Palestinian statehood is firmly back on the UK's diplomatic agenda. All eyes are on what role, if any, the UK will play in shifting that geopolitical dial. Does recognition mean real change or just more headlines?
So strap in as we break down the tech policy that's become a culture war football and try to make sense of a fallen policy that could reshape Britain's standing in the Middle East.
All that plus Wokey, Dokey, Grin and share it, and the occasional well-earned sigh of disbelief.
You know the drill. Kettle on, volume up. Let's riot quietly.
Quiet Riot.
On Tuesday, the UK Prime Minister announced the government's intention formally to recognise the state of Palestine at the September UN Assembly unless a ceasefire had been achieved before then.
I've always said that we will recognise a Palestinian state as a contribution to a proper peace process at the moment of maximum impact for the two-state solution. With that solution now under threat, this is the moment to act. So today, as part of this process towards peace, I can confirm the UK will recognise the state of Palestine by the United Nations General Assembly in September, unless the Israeli government takes substantive steps to end the appalling situation in Gaza, agree to a ceasefire, and commit to a long-term sustainable peace, reviving the prospect of a two-state solution. And this includes allowing the UN to restart the supply of aid and making clear that there will be no annexations in the West Bank. Meanwhile, our message to the terrorists of Hamas is unchanged and unequivocal. They must immediately release all of the hostages, sign up to a ceasefire, disarm, and accept that they will play no part in the government of Gaza.
Very few expect that the Israeli administration will change its policy one iota, and this was confirmed in a statement released moments after Starmer had finished speaking, in which Netanyahu accused the UK of rewarding Hamas's monstrous terrorism. Predictable voices from either side have condemned this either as too little too late or as political posturing that is disloyal to our regional ally. The move does, however, mark a huge shift in UK foreign policy. Jeremy Bowen has called it a diplomatic crowbar to revive the peace process. It follows Macron's announcement that France intends to do likewise in September, making the UK the second G7 country to join the move. So I guess the first question for all of us is, why this and why now?
I must admit, I'm not entirely sure where we're going with this. And where I hope it is part of a process with Gulf allies, with other Arab states, and of course, with our ally in France and other EU countries and countries that sit at the UN, of course, have already long since recognized Palestine as a state. But whatever move this is, it has to be part of that wider process, I think. I would love to believe that this is another kind of coalition of the willing for an actual two-state solution, and that this is all part of a move to support and grow and facilitate the delivery of a ceasefire and then a proper two-state solution. Why now? Well, I think, look, I believe it's genocide, what's happening to the Palestinians by Israel. I don't know how anybody could conclude that it is not, at the very least, war crimes that are happening there. Of course, domestically, there is a huge amount of pressure. On the one hand, I am talking, of course, about the Sultana Corbyn party, but in general, just the increasing number of front pages and headlines and images of starvation and malnutrition that we're seeing verified by all media sources. And I think in the UK, voters of all persuasions are beginning to say, bloody hell, this is horrific. We have to do something.
I mean, I agree largely with what you've said there, Naomi. I mean, clearly a tipping point has been reached within Labour itself, but also within media circles and also within the public. There's no doubt that internal pressures have forced Starmer's hand a little bit. This is not an issue that any politician really wants to wade into in terms of being in the spotlight. I mean, one of the biggest issues is the difference between the diplomatic credibility that's required versus what people are describing as symbolic signaling, I suppose. The recognition of Palestinian statehood is largely symbolic if you don't have American or UN Security Council support. That's a given. And so, as we've mentioned, Britain and France may well act, leading the way from the G7 perspective. But I think it still remains the case that any UN resolution is very likely to be blocked, particularly by the US. And so in terms of where Starmer and where the UK government could go next, it's very difficult. The UK could accompany its recognition with active coalition building at the UN and indeed within the EU, sort of leveraging its moral stance and transforming that into coordinated pressure. We're not going to do anything by ourselves, are we? We could follow EU precedent and, align recognition with sort of broader peace initiatives, such as those that have been promoted by Joseph Borrell. And that's a sort of approach that could help convert symbolic moves into real diplomatic weight.
I mean, I think the images coming out of Gaza have shifted the sort of public opinion dial to such an extent that it feels like a safer political environment to do this in, especially given the charge against Labour of anti-Semitism that had sort of dogged it for several years, which I think had made it even more risk-averse to say anything in this area. I think the Labour Party of 10 years ago would probably have been braver and quicker in this direction. There have been some quite disturbing statements from prominent Israeli cabinet figures about further planned annexations, including in the West Bank. And there is something technical about recognizing a state, that it kind of freezes the borders at a particular point, if that makes sense. So in order to recognize a state, what that declaration tends to include is what their physical borders are at that moment. So maybe that's what it's directed at. The idea that if you try and take more Palestinian land, you will force us to go to this declaration, basically. I guess what interests me is that Netanyahu's attitude is well documented and very deeply ingrained. I mean, I would urge people for a quick sort of historical sojourn to look at his actions and rhetoric around the Oslo peace talks in
I was
the
going back a bit.
mid-90s. Yeah, well, it led to the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin, which many see as what basically killed the two-state peace process in its tracks. Netanyahu emerged from that as Prime Minister of Israel for the first time. So he's not going to change his mind, I guess is what I'm saying. I don't know if you know this, but Naftali Bennett has kind of re-entered the political fray. He was temporary prime minister while, that big series of elections with no result were taking place. And he's re-entered the political space. He's registered a new party with no name, actually. It seems to be
How fashionable.
Seems to be the fashion nowadays. It's just called Bennett 2026. 3 or 4 opinion polls have him polling significantly above Netanyahu, both as a party, showing that it will take quite a few more seats than Likud, but also personally as prime minister. He's the only personality in Israeli politics polling significantly above Netanyahu. And I wonder if this is sort of a move from Europe to say, it's time. Netanyahu is not healthy to that entire region. It's time now.
It would be surprising if that wasn't the case. I mean, from a diplomatic perspective, with our contacts on the ground, governments are going to look for signs that internal discontent is going to help change what's going on. And that way, Israel starts to become a doctor to itself, if that makes sense. You don't want to be taking on an entire political system and an entire population if you don't have to. The French move and the British move, it raises a whole series of complex balancing acts, and this is just one of them. It's looking for moral and historical redress for Palestinians, but without fully isolating Israel, and making sure you've got a strong power base for your views within Israel itself is key to that. And of course, it mustn't become complicit in rewarding violence or being seen to reward violence. So I think we may well be seeing that there are signs coming out of Israel, positive signs, but success is going to hinge and follow through on allied alignment and how well Britain, France, and other countries who are taking this stance now, how well they turn their symbolism into leverage, as I said earlier.
I think that Netanyahu has behaved in a way over the last couple of years that demonstrates exactly the characteristics of a politician who is running out of time and is desperate to avoid an election. There is only so long he can avoid it for. So I think, Alex, you're dead right that, as the pressure builds on holding a general election comes to the fore, it will embolden other powers to say, we need to be speaking directly to the Israeli people. And I think that Jews the world over are feeling less safe because of the actions of Netanyahu and are beginning to get extremely concerned about the conflation of Zionism with Netanyahu's regime, and of course the age-old thing of conflating Jewishness and Zionism. And these are some terrible racist slurs that happen very, very frequently around the world with abandon, but have escalated. There is falling support for him in the country, and I do hope that that is helping to embolden some pretty weak leaders around the rest of the world into changing their position, because Netanyahu is leading a rogue state. And Western leaders have to begin to accept that now. You are not dealing with your democratic ally in the Middle East on whom, you could rely and who relied on you for decades and decades. This is a rogue state now. The Israeli people and, of course, the Palestinians deserve far better than this.
Yeah, and also you're not dealing with someone that wants to end this conflict.
No.
Again, that much
There is no good faith, yeah.
very clear. I think after the events of the 7th of October, Israel had some leeway, basically, from international leaders, because I guess they understood in the bones what their position would be as leaders of their country if that attack had happened on their soil. But, that leeway ran out very, very fast, and we're now in territory of proper, monstrous stuff going on there.
Yeah.
Now, earlier in the week, Trump, on his visit to Scotland, acknowledged that there was real starvation in Gaza, which upset Israeli officials who deny it. Let's have a little listen.
We can save a lot of people. I mean, some of those kids that's real starvation stuff. I see it. And you can't fake that. So we're going to be even more involved. We did some airlifts before, some airdrops, and the people are running for it. And the Prime Minister is going to help us. They're very effective with that. You've done that before, and for many, they've done that for 100 years very well. So,
after Starmer's announcement, Trump said that, and I quote, "You could make the case that you're rewarding Hamas if you do that, but that ultimately it was fine for the UK and France to take a different position." And he added, "We have no view on that." As Trumpian statements go, this is as anodyne as it gets, isn't it? Do you detect a change there?
Yeah, look, I think that is actually part of answering the previous question. The other thing that will be giving them courage, France, UK, others, is this more muted response from Trump, because against the backdrop of all of the geopolitics in the Middle East is, of course, tariffs, and desperately trying to do trade deals with him, tariff deals with him, to protect their own economies. And they wouldn't have wanted to put their own economies at risk by going out on a limb on Israel in the face of him standing very, very closely with Netanyahu, as was previously the case. However, who is the real Donald Trump? He is now saying in Russia and Ukraine, in that situation, and I think we'll probably come on to talk about that his 50-day deadline for a ceasefire there, he's going to reduce to 10 days. Well, what will he say in 10 days' time? What will he say next week about whether or not this would be rewarding Hamas? No one knows. We just cannot invest anything in such an unreliable leader as he. But on the specifics of rewarding Hamas, if people haven't seen it, and maybe we can leave a link in the show notes to it, Emily Thornberry's interview as chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee on Sky News this week was absolutely stellar. And the journalist puts it to her, but, are you, UK government, going to be rewarding Hamas if you go through with recognizing Palestine as a state? And she says, well, look, we need a ceasefire. And in any kind of war situation, in order to get peace, you do have to bring both sides to the table. You have to recognize that those that have done atrocious things have to be given something in order for the whole thing to stop. But in recognizing the Palestine state, what of course is crucial is who you recognize as the leader of that state. And that should be the Palestinian Authority and not Hamas.
Completely agree with that as well. I mean, the two-state solution depends on there being power brokers on both sides who can sit down and talk meaningfully and try to move things forward. And that's problematic with Hamas. That's problematic with Netanyahu as well. And, I think whatever solutions eventually come to pass, key to them working is going to be getting those key problematic individuals out of the picture altogether. I don't see any way that it works, even in the medium term, with those sort of people and their very well documented views on both sides.
Yeah,
trying to sit down, hammering out a long-term agreement. It's not going to happen, is it?
I mean, the only point on which I would, I guess, gently dissent is that, yes, Trump is an extremely unreliable leader in terms of policy, and he does change his mind and blow around as each day goes by. But his direction on both these conflicts, on both Ukraine and Gaza, if you look at their peak Trump awfulness, his idea to turn Gaza into a sort of casino seaside resort, and his treatment of Zelensky in the Oval Office, the general direction from those points onwards has been the opposite way.
Yeah.
Quite steadily. It would surprise me, even in his inconstancy, if he suddenly went back to that kind of position. He seems to be moving in the opposite direction. I think the reason he's doing that is a selfish Trump reason. You know, he made a promise to sort of get all this sorted out within 24 hours of coming into power. And what I sense from seeing him talk recently is that he's genuinely surprised. I mean, he didn't expect to do it in 24 hours, but I think he's been genuinely surprised at how ineffective he's been at making any kind of influence on either Netanyahu or Putin. I feel that maybe he senses he's being made a fool of them. And he won't like that. His ego won't like that. No. So I think, you know, that's the terrible motive driving this. It is driving it in the right direction, at least.
There's one other thing that occurs to me, and that's whether or not a man with limited abilities, let's be honest, whether he's got capacity to be raging about the Middle East and raging about Ukraine and be raging about Epstein. And his focus is very much on Epstein. I'm not entirely sure that the Trump brain is capable of maintaining that sort of level of anger, fury, and even chaos across three...
multiple fronts.
Yeah, exactly.
I think Trump is transactional. And being transactional, he doesn't really understand ideological constraints for himself or for anyone else. And having offered transactions that he thinks are rational and that Netanyahu should take and Putin should take, he just doesn't understand why they're not taking them. So he's beginning to see them as people he can't do business with, which is a very bad position for them to be in.
Quiet Riot. Now, this is a paid advertisement from BetterHelp. Thanks to them for sponsoring today's show. If there's something that's not in short supply these days, it's opinions and advice. Heck, it's what this show majors in. Who should I vote for? What coffee maker should I use? How do I stop AI taking my job away? It can all be a bit overwhelming, and if you're looking for advice on something as serious as mental health, it really is important to find advice you can really trust. Poor mental health can be utterly debilitating, and getting trustworthy support is, I think, the essential first step in trying to turn things around, whether you've experienced major trauma or are just struggling a bit with life's daily challenges. So, how do you cut through all the noise? Well, that brings us to BetterHelp, which, as well as having more than 5,000 therapists in the UK, is also the world's largest online therapy platform, having served more than 5 million people. It's popular, an App Store rating of 4.9 out of 5 tells its own story, and BetterHelp makes it incredibly easy to fit therapy into your busy life. As the largest online therapy provider in the world, BetterHelp can provide access to mental health professionals with a diverse variety of expertise. Talk it out with BetterHelp. Our listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/quietriot. That's betterhelp.com/quietriot.
Quiet Riot. We're talking about Ukraine. It is an area in which Trump's view against him to harden in a better direction. He said he's very disappointed in President Putin and reduced the deadline of 50 days he had given him for a ceasefire to 10 or 12 days from now because he knows what the answer will be. Is that a significant movement for Ukraine?
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. All caveats about what I said about investing anything in such an unreliable person. And as you've said, he claimed he'd finish it within a day of taking office, and here we are 8 months later. He's clearly running out of patience with it. So I don't think we should underestimate that level of I'm done with this now, and therefore might do a significant intervention in Ukraine's favor. And Russia is in a precarious situation. It is even proposing to reduce defense spending. I don't know if you guys have seen that in the press, because it knows it can't sustain the fight at the current levels. So there is a real moment of danger here for them. And Trump will know this, his advisors will have told him. And as the transactional guy that he is, okay, well, I'm not going to back a loser if they're about to face a real difficulty in this war. And then there's the whole issue of secondary sanctions potentially coming into force. And they will work as secondary sanctions, given that there is now very little US-Russia trade by comparison to pre-war levels.
What do we mean when we say secondary sanctions?
So secondary sanctions are where you sanction somebody you trade with who is continuing to trade with Russia. So, for example, while Russia and US might not be doing much trade together, Russia and India are still trading, and India and the US are still trading. So the US can say to India, we don't like that you're doing that because we believe these are bad people, and we're going to hit you unless you pull back from the level of trade you're doing with them. We will sanction you for that secondary trading, if you like. What this could end up doing is forcing Russia to further eat into their reserves if they have fewer global trading partners. And remember, Russia has very, very limited ability to borrow on the open market at the moment. So they are highly reliant on the trade that they do have left with trading partners around the world. So some people will tell you secondary sanctions won't work. I think they could. And I definitely think they're a lever that needs to be pulled at this stage because Russia is in a economically parlous situation with regard to the war.
Now, on domestic reaction, Zara Sultana, who's of course the co-leader of the new party on the left with Corbyn, she posted that this is a PR stunt and David Lammy belongs in The Hague. Is that a fair assessment?
David Lammy does not belong in The Hague. That is not a fair assessment. Bibi Netanyahu does belong in The Hague, and that is a very fair assessment. And of course, I don't think it is a PR stunt for all of the reasons we've said above about if it's part of a big process and a concerted effort, it is the right thing to be doing. Should it have happened a long time ago? Probably. Could it have happened a long time ago? Don't know. I'm not in government. I'm not privy to all the information they have.
Would it have made a difference?
Who knows? But there is an enormous pool of voters out there in the UK, many who will be in our mentions after we record this, telling us that we belong in The Hague, and they are capitalizing on those voters. They want them, and they believe that Palestine has now become the wedge issue to break people away from the Labour Party to them.
The thing is, I don't disagree with that as a voter position. I think a voter is perfectly at liberty to hold that as a position. I hold that as a position. I'm not that David Lammy belongs to The Hague, but that, there's a genocide going on. But I also understand that a government that is also trying to safeguard British interests in the region that may be a little bit more precarious than appears to someone who doesn't have the intelligence briefings. Like, from whom do we get intelligence if the Israeli state decides to cut us off their intelligence in the region? Israel is our only out-and-out ally in that part of the world. And so I do understand why what I want the government to say and what the government feels it can say are not necessarily the same thing. And so you end up in that terrible position where the implication is that you're somehow defending Israel. When you're not defending Israel, you're just highlighting the fact that it's complicated when you're leading a country, when you're the government of a country. It's complicated what you say to allies around the world in order to keep your influence with them and try to nudge them in the right direction.
Just like we saw during Starmer's visit to Washington earlier in the year, the UK press just seemed to be actively trying to throw banana skins for Starmer to slip on, to embarrass the government as much as possible, and elicit Trump's views on UK domestic matters, which I found, if you're talking about things that are hard to swallow, standing by while another foreign leader tries to tell you how to be running your own country is completely galling. Alex and Kenny, of course, these were once your people. Do journalists have any duty to the national interest anymore? Or is it just about getting a story?
There is a difference between getting the story and manufacturing the story. Anyone who saw that press conference, it was weird, right? I'm not alone in thinking it was weird that there was a slew of journalists plainly very hostile to the UK government, sort of cheer-led by GB News, that were trying to get Trump to say stuff about, the inheritance tax on farms, or suggesting to him that Starmer was trying to actively censor Truth Social, which we'll come to talk about the Online Safety Act in the next segment. But it just seemed to me really, really peculiar, and I think a line is being crossed. I looked at the headlines the day after Starmer's announcement, so on Wednesday morning, and 3 national newspapers ran with the Israel line that Starmer is rewarding Hamas terrorism. I can't think of that happening at any point in the past. I can't think of such a significant shift of UK foreign policy happening, and for it to be covered purely in terms of the furious reaction of another country's leader.
Well, I
find
think there
it
were quite a few Brexit headlines that were straight out of Moscow attack lines.
That may well be the case, but like I said, it does feel at times like we are looking at a section of the press that have entirely their own agenda that has nothing to do with holding government to account, has nothing to do with journalistic integrity, has nothing to do with freedom of the press, and it has everything to do with their own agendas. And that makes me feel very, very unsafe.
And listeners, if you do feel similarly to Alex on that front, we have got a call to action for you. At Best for Britain, we are running a letter to Sky. It sends an email directly from you to them to complain about their totally disproportionate coverage of Reform UK, cutting to Reform UK's own studio, even while the Lionesses were parading their championship through the streets of London, and all of the wonderful moment that should have been. They cut directly to the Reform studio. If you want to take action and tell them that you don't like that, and to ask them what balance they are providing by giving similar coverage to other parties, then find the link in the show notes and fire off your angry complaint. But also we have a call to action, of course, for the people in Gaza. It's the UNICEF Appeal for Children in Crisis. And again, you'll find a link in the show notes. Quiet riot. Right then, it's that time again. We hand the mic to Alex, who's been bravely wading through the culture war swamp.
Are you sure?
So that we don't have to. From supermarket signage panic to people accusing cartoon dinosaurs of pushing an agenda, it's time for the stories that just did not ask to be politicised and yet somehow ended up on GB News anyway. It's, of course, time for Wokey Dokey.
Wokey Dokey.
Alex, what have you unearthed for us this week in the wild and windy land of wokeness?
So, topical this week, it's about the women's football. And we go to Spiked with Georgina Mumford's Don't Let Woke Spoil the Lionesses' Victory, which I must admit I did not know woke was doing. I love how it's now a noun as well, Oh no, what is woke up to? the gist of it is that by saying, oh, the women's team has acquitted itself better than the men's team in international competitions, which is it's sort of undeniable fact that this is some sort of woke agenda to go, ha ha, women are better than men, and that it's dividing the sport. And this is terrible because, women's football should be left pure, there for everyone to enjoy. Contrast that to spiked also with Duleep Ali Raja's women's football still not a spectator sport exactly 10 years ago, which asserted that the reason the sport had failed to take off had nothing to do with lack of funding or chauvinism, but, and I quote, because women's football is, well, a bit rubbish. So
what a difference a decade makes.
I know. So I guess when the women's England team was not doing so well, it was okay to fight a culture war over it. But now that they're doing really well, we should allow everyone to join in, including those who said it was all a bit rubbish.
Well, I wondered, so I'm really not a football fan, by the way, guys. I mean, I occasionally go to games. I live with my partner, who is an avid football fan, and I podcast with Alex, who is similarly very into the sport, but I am ignorant on it, really. But my God, I loved watching that final, and I, like a complete yobbo, ran out onto my balcony and screamed like, "Get in England!" And I was like absolutely overjoyed. And I would never probably have done that for the men's team, but bloody loved it for the Lionesses. But I asked my partner, what about the World Cup? And he said, well, the problem is in the USA dominates women's football because it is seen as a women's sport. Because men it's too weak for men to play soccer. Real men play American football, and real men play ice hockey, and things.
Real men play games where they have to wear body armor to stop them getting bruised.
I guess there's some of that in it, but the point is that has resulted in a lot of money going into women's football in the US for a much longer time. My niece is a professional footballer, and she went to America on a soccer, as they call it, scholarship to study over there, and then came back to Greece and is now playing professional football, having cut her teeth in an environment with much, much higher standards, basically. So it's a completely different world. But I think we're catching up. I wouldn't be surprised if we did very well in the next World Cup.
Yay!
Especially if we manage to keep hold of Wiegman, who seems to be some sort of fucking genius.
And actually, I wanted to comment on that, and leadership, and the wonderful leadership she has shown with that squad, and all of the wonderful stories about allowing different team members to bring things on the tour with them that help their mental health, help them feel able to decompress at the end of the day, whether that was one player bringing their Lego set with them, whether it was another having access to a keyboard, piano, because that's her way of de-stressing and keeping mindful and things like that. And I just think, there's something in that.
Yeah, I think you're letting woke spoil their victory now, you see.
I think if the men's team was a little bit more woke, it might win.
I think if the men's team hired Wiegman, it might win. So there we go. This week, I guess, I don't know, what is woke? It's woke to just say that winning the European Championship twice in a row is better than not.
Well, thank you, Alex, and listeners. Don't forget, send in any wokey dokiness you find to quietriotpod@gmail.com.
If you've shopped online, chances are you've bought from a business powered by Shopify. You know that purple Shop Pay button you see at checkout? The one that makes buying so incredibly easy? That's Shopify. And there's a reason so many businesses sell with it, because Shopify makes it incredibly easy to start and run your business. Shopify is the commerce platform behind 10% of all e-commerce in the US. Sign up for your $1 per month trial and start selling today at shopify.com/promo. Go to shopify.com/promo.
Alex, Kenny, I'm sure you'll join me in wishing we had all bought shares in VPN companies Because this week, the new age restrictions of the Online Safety Act come into force for a range of websites, from pornographic sites all the way to social media platforms like Blue Sky. So the Online Safety Act's main aim, of course, is to make the internet safer for people in the UK, especially children. Last week, under its children's codes, platforms have now had to prevent young people from encountering harmful content relating to things like suicide, self-harm, eating disorders, and of course, pornography, which means age verification has been rolled out by all law-abiding tech companies and means UK web users have been busy downloading VPNs so they can set their location to another country to get around the need to age verify. Now, few disagree with the need for governments the world over to do far more to protect young people from online harm. But there are concerns from tech experts about the companies that websites are using to perform some of the age verification checks. As the law comes into effect, there is no public register of approved age assurance providers, no requirement for those age assurance providers to meet any specific privacy or security standards, instead relying on data protection alone. No requirement for platforms to choose trusted or certified providers. Despite significant support for the Act among voters, and YouGov have polled it, it is strong, Nigel Farage has chosen to shore up the libertarian flanks of his base by condemning the Act, with some in Reform UK even dubbing it the Online Censorship Act, which of course has kicked off a political tussle. Secretary of State Peter Kyle took to the airwaves decrying Farage as siding with child abusers. Jimmy Savile's name even gets mentioned. Farage and others in Reform UK have lashed back, demanding an apology. Let's have a little listen now.
See that Nigel Farage is already saying that he's going to overturn these laws. So, we have people out there who are extreme pornographers, peddling hate, peddling violence. Nigel Farage is on their side. Make no mistake about it, if people like Jimmy Savile were alive today, he'd be perpetrating his crimes online. And Nigel Farage is saying that he's on their side.
I'm sorry.
Not the side of children who are...
I'm going to ask you to clarify. Do you honestly think to say Nigel Farage is on Jimmy Savile's side?
When it comes to online activity, we have seen unfettered access of adults to children via social media. When we put in the age verification, it stops strange adults getting in touch with children.
So, guys, I couldn't decide whether to start by discussing the merits and drawbacks of the bill/act itself, or the political furore that is now emerging between Labour and Reform, despite this act being a Conservative government piece of legislation.
with which they now disagree.
Exactly, of course they do. But let's go with the act for now. So given the concerns about the companies that perform age verification, that they will hold an enormous volume of highly sensitive personal information, face photos, credit card details, etc., and the sites that you were trying to access as you entered them, is there a risk this act protects some young people who can't access a VPN to work around the age verification issue, while putting adults at risk of scamming, sextortion, or other data breaches?
It's not a risk, it's a stuck-on certainty. This well-meaning legislation has made this part of the internet in Britain the juiciest target around now for bad online actors, of which there are many out there. In many ways, it's kind of like saying, that I'm trying to think of an example that doesn't involve child pornography. So they're saying, look, we love the sea's a fabulous place, and we spent many happy years playing in the sea, but the sea is now full of sewage and horrible things, and we're going to solve that problem by making it harder to get into the sea. It doesn't actually deal with any of the problems at all. It deals with some symptoms, but it sets up this juicy target. Yeah, some of the age verification schemes say that they are not keeping data. Others are keeping data, and there's already been reports that they're selling it on for advertising purposes and such like. But beyond the security of the data systems is an even bigger risk, and that's the risk of spoofing. And spoofing is something that we've probably all experienced.
Explain that. Explain what you mean by spoofing.
So you get an email from HMRC saying, you owe us money or we owe you a rebate. Click this link, give us your details, and we'll sort it all out. And it's not from HMRC at all. It's from somebody spoofing HMRC to get your details, either to steal money from you or to steal your data and make money from that.
Oh, right. So there are companies that are now spoofing you saying, oh, you need to age verify in order to use Google or whatever website that you were going to go to.
Yeah. Wherever there's an opportunity to spoof, bad actors will spoof. And this, I mean, you mentioned how many VPNs have been downloaded this week. This area is now ripe for spoofing, for bad actors to come in and pretend that they're offering age verification. And don't forget, most people, it'll be the first time they've used age verification software of any sort. So they won't even be that familiar with the pitfalls. They won't know what to look out for.
Okay, so what else could the government have done or should have done, or what would make it better than putting adults at risk in order to protect children?
There is no easy solution, is there? The thing about 13 and 14-year-old kids who want to look for porn, for example, is they're going to find it. They're just going to have to go around the corner a little bit to find it. The key issues are the fact that this stuff exists. Secondary issue is that kids are getting access to it. And then the third issue is that kids will still be able to get access to it. They'll just use somebody else's login details. Or they'll do what's already happening and they use other bits of software to spoof the systems themselves, to game the systems, to upload pictures of their faces that are not actually their faces, but get them through the front door. So in other words, what we're seeing here isn't actually solving any of the problems that we're up against, but it is creating a whole new
industry, some of which will be perfectly legitimate and others which will not be, and it is unregulated. Now, Alex, I imagine a lot of our listeners are extremely conflicted on all of this. On the one hand, who could disagree reasonably with the need to protect people? We all know that children in particular, but other people have managed to get access to information that is warping their worldview, warping their view of what is normal, what is not, etc., and potentially even more harmful information about suicide and controlled eating and things like that. But on the other hand, are worried about the encroachment of Big Brother into their own lives and into the time they spend online. Where's your head at with all of that? Can you help our listeners to kind of navigate this? On the one hand, on the other, quagmire that I know has been going around my own brain like soup.
Well, look, maybe I can, because I am also very conflicted. So I've been talking to people on both sides of this argument and trying to understand their objections and difficulties. And I keep coming up against this conundrum, which is that the thing that allows the internet to become a medium of bad actors is the anonymity. And the thing that also makes the internet an extremely helpful tool for not bad actors is anonymity. I was having a conversation with someone who is a journalist in an area where basically there is an active situation at the moment with Muslim women being targeted. And he was saying that this potentially provides people with a list of women to target, basically. There is no way logically I can resolve this conundrum, because anything you try to do around this area will target online anonymity. It is the only way to make internet a legislated space instead of Wild West.
Yeah.
And the moment you do that, then you remove a lot of the huge advantages that anonymity provides to actually oppressed, marginalized demographics.
We know this as people with fairly large social media followings, yours much larger than mine. The number of people who follow us who are not using their real identity, and they will say to us, look, it's not that I'm a weirdo, it's because I have a stalker and I cannot put my own name and face on, or, I'm a civil servant and I don't want my employer to know that I read political content online and it might cause difficult HR conversations for me. They're not bad faith actors who are trying to...
Of course, and have territories like the US that will check your social media output before you go into the country. So you have people wiping their histories or taking with them burner phones before they try to enter a country like the US. And so all of that is completely legitimate. I don't see the scamming angle quite so much. I would never use my credit card to do that anyway. I don't see what huge advantage some scammer would derive from me putting up a picture of my ugly mug online. It's there on Facebook if they want it, and a myriad other things. Certainly, it's a space that could be better regulated. And I take completely on board the points you listed at the start, Naomi. The government should be stepping in and saying, these are the
The
approved
trusted trader scheme.
age verification
Yeah.
people, and this is how we regulate them and the data they hold. Because otherwise, you're basically doing it on trust.
And they have issued enormous fines on Monzo and Starling in recent years. I mean, I think Monzo this week to the tune of 30 million for not doing enough know your client verification checking, and then money laundering happening on their platforms as a result. So where there is a regulation around it, there are financial penalties for organizations involved who don't follow it.
Yeah, so definitely it should step up and take care of that side of things. But on the basic philosophical debate, everyone is trying. Europe is trying to do something very similar. It's also worth saying that age verification is only a part of the Online Safety Act. There are other very important parts of the Online Safety Act. For instance, putting the duty of care on the providers, on the service providers, about the content they put out there, about harmful content that they might put out there. And there is a very similar piece of legislation in Europe, the Digital Services Act. And Europe is looking at a harmonized age verification scheme that will apply throughout the whole bloc. So everyone is thinking about it, and someone has to actually do something in order to test the kinks and the potential drawbacks and how it might be taken advantage, because otherwise you will never find out. You will always proceed on the assumption that this is a space that is incapable of being regulated, which makes it a space that belongs to criminals, I'm afraid.
Quiet Riot. As a sports fan, I have to confess, sometimes the game gets kind of boring. That's when I unfold my Samsung Galaxy Z Fold 7 and use multi-window viewing on its large screen. Boring game? I'm checking out my fantasy baseball league at the same time. Score still 1-0? I'm replying to emails in the other window, scoring points with the boss. Semifinals finally getting exciting? I'm buying tickets to the finals and booking my flights. Can your phone do that?
The new Galaxy Z Fold 7. Get yours at Samsung.com.
YouGov polling shows Reform voters have less awareness of the new rules than other types of voters. Perhaps that is because of their age demographic, skew a bit older, but they are only slightly more likely to oppose it than others. Broadly, the country is in favour of all of this. So one might argue that Farage is really out of step with his own voters on this issue, let alone the public at large. So is his position, and he really has gone out strongly to condemn this act, is it just a Nigel thing? I mean, he personally hates it, just as he did the smoking ban? Or is there something more to it?
I think part of it is the fact that, as I discussed with Peter Gagan last week, Reform UK is trying to open itself, to advertise itself more to those parts of the tech world where there is dark money to be spent, there is Bitcoin to be spent, and there are very valuable donors and very valuable influence to be had by getting into that space. And I think it's entirely consistent with their wish to do that, that they also advocate effectively for anonymity online. It may not be the fairest take to say that anonymity online means you're on the side of the pedophiles trying to entice some child into a friendship by playing an online game and pretending they're 14 themselves. But it is. It is one of the things that it does. And so I find it personally really quite delicious that Reform UK are getting a dose of their own medicine by having this accusation leveled against them that is marginally unfair, but actually true. It's what they do all the time. And I have to say, when I saw Peter Kyle's interview, my reaction was, ooh, Kitty has claws. And I did rather enjoy it. So, but that's just me being mean-spirited, basically.
So I wonder if Reform voters in particular, and probably other people too, will be supportive of it until they stumble across something that they think should be easy to access, but now no longer is. And the Act means that there is this very broad interpretation of what should and shouldn't be accessed by those who haven't age verified. So modern day teenagers, for instance, won't be allowed to access songs on Spotify that contain explicit lyrics in the way we all were allowed to, listen to whatever record we wanted full of swear words as teenagers. So I guess, is there a risk, and Kenny, I'd love your view on this, that while the general public in the UK quite like banning things, that once they encounter a banned thing they think shouldn't be restricted, they could turn against the rules? And therefore, could reform be preempting that? And actually, this is a cleverer move by Farage than the polling currently suggests it is.
I definitely wouldn't use clever. The point he makes, whatever his reasoning is a valid point. That there are two quite clear sides in this debate. Equally, I think it's important for us to remember that this isn't just about stopping kids seeing suicide sites and hardcore pornography and such like. There are two stories that have broken. The first one that I think is worth mentioning is the fact that YouTube is now the second most watched media service in Britain. Only the BBC is watched by more people than YouTube in terms of media services. Ofcom's annual report, which is a big old deal. And, there's 20% of younger viewers go to YouTube first when they turn on smart TVs. They're not going to the sort of sites the channels we'd have gone to. But older people are also watching more of its content. So park that. YouTube is now massive. YouTube is online. YouTube does have some naughty content. Nobody would ever describe it as being like the dark web. Australia today has banned kids from signing up for YouTube accounts. So Google is about to go to war with the Australian government because Australia has said to Google, who own YouTube, anybody under 16 cannot now sign up for a YouTube account. So we're in a position now where the second most popular form of media is starting to be shut down, or large parts of it are being shut down, to the sort of people who are most likely to use it. And what happens if you shut things down to the group of people who are most likely to use it? They will go round the side. They're going to find new ways of accessing it. If one kid finds a password or an account they can use, that's going to be right the way through the classroom in 24 hours. So it's not just about bad stuff. It's about stuff that adults can access legally, but kids can't until they turn 16 or 18.
I mean, there's a lot of stuff that at the moment is annoying me. Like there's stuff around alcohol and, like explicit lyrics on music and stuff like that I'm just like, oh, for God's sake, this is not what it was designed to prevent. And we've got to fix that, I think. And I therefore begin to wonder, is there a risk that could inadvertently make young people more vulnerable if they're not able to access information about their health and well-being? I'm thinking about being a teenage girl who might need an abortion and trying to find out information about that and whether that kind of information might become restricted because it is, content linked to what would typically be considered adult.
Yeah, and we've had actually reports of certain strings put behind age verification on Reddit because they contain sort of LGBTQ plus content.
Right, exactly.
Which would be invaluable to a teenager unsure of their sexuality or their identity that wants to kind of log on and search stuff like, what does it mean to be gay or whatever.
Yeah.
So of
or
course,
to talk to other gay people, and if they're alone in their tiny village and they've got a religious family that won't talk to them about it, and these are safe spaces for very, very vulnerable people at the moment.
But I have to say, I also feel that tech people should be more forgiving about this being basically the beta testing phase of something that hasn't been tried before. They put out programs that are full of bugs, software and hardware. First generation phones notoriously have lots of stuff wrong with them, and they test it on the public. They get feedback and improve the next generation of the stuff they put out. So that is the only way to do tech, and that includes tech regulation. It's to try the thing, find out where it works, where it doesn't work, and iron out the kinks as you go. And like I said, I hope the government are very proactive at doing that. Yes, there is a risk that effectively you push young adults into dark web space that then opens them up to all kinds of other, even worse risks that are out there. And I don't know how you resolve that because, again, like I said, I come up against this basic inconsistency, this basic logical circle that cannot be squared, that says, how do you preserve anonymity in a legislated space? You can't.
Okay, let's do a call to action on this gnarly topic. If you think that age verification companies should have compulsory high privacy and security standards to adhere to, head over to the Open Rights Group website to sign their open letter to the government. There'll be a link in the show notes to that.
Quiet, riot. And now, as tradition demands, just when the news cycle has left us bruised, baffled, and possibly buried under a pile of broken promises, we turn to those who bring us reasons to smile. Yes, it's time for our moment of weekly uplift where good news still exists. And Kenny Campbell is legally required to find it this week. It's time for Grin and Share It.
Good news is welcome to me. Bad news is hell come to me. Good news. I want good news.
Kenny, for the love of what's left of our optimism, tell us something that doesn't make us want to move to the woods and go off grid. What have you got for us this week?
I stumbled on a story this week that makes me want creationism to be true. It's a wonderful story, and there's a bit of a random hot take on it, but let me talk you through what's happened. The Denver Museum of Nature and Science has been doing some work on getting rid of fossil fuels, which is very appropriate for a museum, I think. Museums and fossils go hand in hand. It was doing some research to see whether it could use geothermal technology and heat exchangers to change its buildings over from using fossil fuels to heat them. And so they got some experts in with a big drill, an 800-foot-long drill. And it's one of those drills that's used for taking core samples. So it's essentially like a big old hollow tube that goes down 800 feet, pulls 800 feet of sample out, and then scientists can look at it and say, yes, this is good rock for plugging your heat exchangers in. And it's only a couple of inches wide. It's not huge.
It's like the things that cheesemongers use.
What sort of cheese shops do you go to? 800-foot-long cheese slices?
No, but
That's the stuff of Alex's dreams.
The same thing. Do they go to the middle of the wheel and can pull out like a round tube of it?
An apple corer is probably what you're thinking. I hate cheese. It makes me very ill. So I'll go with apple corer. But it's the right idea. Yeah, it's a tube that lets you pull something out of the middle. So we went into the car park. They dropped this drill down 800 feet, only a few inches across, and it just happened to pass perfectly over a fossil. The fossil, 700 and something feet down, was captured neat and perfectly preserved in this core sample, which made it not only the deepest fossil ever found in Denver, but also the oldest, quite remarkably. Partly it dates back to the late Cretaceous period, and it belonged to some dinosaurs that roamed the Great Plains at the time. The thing is, the museum didn't know that these dinosaurs were wandering about in that part of the world all those millions of years ago either. So they now found themselves in a position where, by accidentally drilling a hole in the car park, it turns out it's a perfect vertebrae, but it's part of a much bigger fossil, which is 787 feet below the surface.
Wow.
And they really want to go down and excavate the rest of the dinosaur. But they've said it's not going to happen anytime soon because they need the parking space. Glorious. I've got this great vision of whichever god it is that you follow and worship. I've got this fabulous vision of that particular god sitting back in an easy chair with a glass of whatever your god drinks and thinking, this is going to make the people in Denver really lose their shit, isn't it?
You are both a little tiny bit older than me, so you might not remember. But my childhood, there was a cartoon called Denver the Last Dinosaur.
Ooh.
Oh.
And it was Denver, the last dinosaur. He's my friend and a whole lot more. And now we've got an actual dinosaur in Denver.
Way!
I am very excited about this news, Kenny.
You sounded a little bit like Eric Cartman when you sang that. I'd be really worried about that.
Houseman is a pig.
Respect my authority. And you're going to kill Kenny because of it as well, aren't you?
You guys, I'm going home.
You never know what you'll find if you drill a hole in the car park of your local museum.
That's right. Next time they might pull out Bernie Sanders. Thanks, Kenny. And listeners, as ever, we'll drop a link in the show notes because that sounds as if there will be good visuals attached to it. So you can not just grin, but also share it.
And that is it for this week's Quiet Riots. Thank you so much for joining us, whether from a picket line, the park bench, or just hiding under a blanket, muttering, it's all going to be fine.
If you liked what you heard, please support the pod at ko-fi.com/Quiet Riot Pod. Think of it as buying us a coffee, or at the very least, helping us afford the biscuits that we all argue over.
And if you're more of a bookworm than a biscuit fan, why not check out our bookshop? Links in the show notes, and every purchase supports both the podcast and an independent local booksellers. That's what we call a plot twist with heart.
We'll be back at the weekend with our Sunday School edition, the slightly calmer, still spicy cousin of the main show, where we dig deeper into the week's political tangle.
Until then, stay curious, stay fired up in all the right ways. And remember, democracy doesn't defend itself. But at least we can have a laugh while we try.
Thank you again, listeners. We love you in a healthy, boundaries-respecting way, of course, and we'll see you all in The Hague.
Bye!
Bye!
Quiet Riot is an audio production by Cooler Heads with Naomi Smith and Alex Andreou. Produced by Kenny Campbell. Music by Mariana Sangeeta. Artwork by Simona Canelu. And edited by me, Alex Reese. Quiet Riot is a co-production with Sandstone Global.
Quiet Riot. You guys, I'm going home.